Oregon lost 286,000 jobs in 2 months' time in early 2020. Job losses were not distributed evenly across workers, geography, or even industries. The Oregon Employment Department has released a report on this, and two economists have joined us to talk about the disparate impacts among workers in Oregon.
Hi, this is Gail Kromenauer, State Employment Economist.
Hello, my name is Sarah Cunningham, and I'm an employment economist with the Oregon Employment Department.
Hi, Gail. Hi, Sarah. Can you first set the pre-pandemic picture of Oregon's economy for us?
In 2019, Oregon hit an all-time record for total employment. And those record highs were spread across many areas of the economy. Jobs were at peak levels in construction, non-durable goods manufacturing, professional and business services, healthcare, leisure and hospitality, and both public and private education.
And at the same time that Oregon was experiencing record levels of employment across multiple sectors, the state's unemployment rate was also at a record low. And that was the case across demographics too. Unemployment rates for men, women, white workers, and Hispanic or Latino workers were at their lowest rates in at least 2 decades. And although unemployment rates were higher for teen workers, Black workers, and those identifying as 2 or more races compared to Oregon's overall rate, they were at or near their record lows as well.
Then COVID-19 and the pandemic recession happened. What parts of the economy were hit the hardest?
First, I think it's important to acknowledge that everyone was impacted by the pandemic somehow, either in their jobs, or their health, or the places we could or couldn't go, or the daily organization and running of our households. By disparate impact, here we're talking about the industries and groups of workers that were impacted in employment-related ways to a greater degree. And in that, 3 service-related sectors bore the brunt of the pandemic. Leisure and hospitality was impacted the most by far. It lost half of its employment, or about 110,000 jobs, between February and April 2020. The other initially hardest hit sectors included other services. So that's things like barbershops, hair salons, and tattoo parlors, and also the education sector.
What did that mean for workers by demographics?
Well, heading into the pandemic, women held a slight majority of jobs in both leisure and hospitality and in other services. Women also held 2 out of 3 jobs in education. So the public health and safety measures that restricted economic activity were more likely to affect them. We know that leisure and hospitality lost the most jobs by far. Hotels, restaurants, and bars were also more likely to have younger workers and workers earning lower wages. Workers of Hispanic and Latino origin were also overrepresented in leisure and hospitality, so they were also more likely to be impacted by these restrictions.
So we know who was most likely impacted. So what actually happened?
Much of what we expected. We took a look at unemployment insurance claims information for both prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic period. For the regular unemployment insurance claims, those are most likely people who lost payroll jobs. And we saw incredible increases in claim activity across all demographics. So if we look at just men and women, again, the volume was up tremendously for both of them. But before the pandemic, women made up slightly less than half of the labor force and about 40% of the regular UI claims. During the pandemic, their claims volume was so much higher than men's that they accounted for slightly more than half, or 51% of the regular claims. Similarly, for young workers, before the pandemic, they made up about 9% of regular claims, even though they were 15% of the workforce. And again, the claims volume rose tremendously across all age groups. But for those youngest workers, ages 16 to 24, their volume was up so much more that their claims share came in line with their share of the labor force at about 15%.
We also have information about claims by ethnicity. While we would have expected to see shares of claims rise for Hispanic and Latino workers because they had higher shares of jobs in the hardest hit industries, leisure and hospitality, that didn't happen. It stayed about the same as it was prior to the pandemic.
Do we know why it stayed the same?
We don't know for sure. It could be that they weren't laid off as much as other workers. It could also be that Hispanic or Latino workers who lost their jobs in Oregon faced some barriers to accessing unemployment insurance benefits.
How so?
Well, 1 out of 3 Hispanic or Latino people in Oregon's labor force have limited English proficiency. And the pandemic created a situation where people were more likely to get assistance online or over the phone during the pandemic. The regular unemployment online claim was initially only available in English. So those two things combined could have been barriers to access to any workers needing language assistance.
Do we have any information about unemployment claims by race?
Unfortunately, not much. In the regular unemployment claims data, the pre-pandemic period had about 2/3 of records without race information. And during the pandemic period, about 1/3 of the records were missing race information.
What were your biggest takeaways from the recession? What changed the most?
To me, the pandemic recession really exposed the vulnerability that those working low-wage, mostly service sector jobs faced in both economic and health and safety related terms. I'm thankful for the numerous unemployment insurance programs that provided economic stability to the multitudes of Oregonians who lost their jobs or were otherwise unable to work during the pandemic. I think the state of our economy would likely be a lot worse today if not for those programs.
For me, I'm still amazed at the scale and the speed of change. It's been like economic whiplash the last year and a half. The last recession, the Great Recession, ground on for years. There were almost 2 years of ongoing job losses. And by the time that we had recovered back to the pre-pandemic period, 7 years had passed. The losses and the recovery are both happening so much faster right now. And the labor market dynamics are not like anything I've ever seen. And much like Sarah said, the second thing I think about is the people who didn't lose their jobs. When I think about a global health pandemic, I also think about the exposure risks for those who remained working at in-person or high contact jobs. And the data suggests that lower wage earners, younger workers, and workers from communities of color who remained employed appeared to have had relatively less opportunity to telecommute.